Borlaug, who was a man of extraordinary vision.
Norman Borlaug was a great bless to Indians.
When you talk about food security, it doesn't take very long to have the name Norman Borlaug come up.
By 1944, Mexico's drastically increasing population had caused a food production crisis. Norman Borlaug used his scientific expertise to take a stand against world hunger by crossbreeding various types of wheat to sustain Mexico's people against extreme droughts and fungal epidemics. Within 15 years, 95% of the wheat being produced in Mexico was Borlaug's miracle wheat. Borlaug went on to work to feed the hungry across the world in a green revolution that impacted people in the Americas, Asia, and Africa. To this day, Borlaug's work has been credited with saving over 1 billion people worldwide. The number of malnourished and starving people drastically increased in developing countries as industrialization spread throughout the world, due to the increase of farmers filling factory jobs. Along with many other developing countries during the 1940s, Mexico's agricultural base was crumbling. The Mexican president, Lázaro Cárdenas, was carrying out a major land reformation. He broke up giant estates and separated them into small holdings, otherwise known as ejidos. They were also facing a deadly plant parasitic fungi known as stem rust that was destroying their agriculture. In the 1940s, life was dreadful for many developing nations due to the limited amount of grain being produced, as a consequence of the stem rust epidemic. In Mexico, it took 200 hours just to cultivate a bushel of corn, while in Iowa it took 10 hours. 55% of Mexico's food was being imported from various countries at the cost of over $100 million in U.S. currency. Mexico was in desperate need to increase domestic food growth. Stem rust, a devastating fungus that attacks the plant stem, diminished wheat production in Mexico. The most extensive outbreaks of stem rust in Mexico occurred in 1931, 1940, and 1941. The Vice President of the United States, Henry A. Wallace, was trying to develop a solution to this problem. Before he started his term as Vice President, he went down to Mexico to see their agricultural problems firsthand and convinced the U.S.-based Rockefeller Group that they could work with Mexico's government to help alleviate them from their predicament. In 1943, the Rockefeller Foundation teamed up with the Mexican government in a combined effort to make Mexico self-sufficient in the production of cereal grains and to relieve them of the burden of stem rust. This partnership would later be known as the International Maize and Wheat Improvement Center, or otherwise known as CIMMYT. Dr. Alvin C. Steakman, a former professor at the University of Minnesota, who was well known as a pioneer in combating plant diseases, was asked by CIMMYT to join its program. Dr. Steakman became the project director for the group and invited one of his previous students to join him. This would be the gateway into Norman Borlaug's plant pathology career. Norman Borlaug was born on March 25, 1914, in a small town just outside of Cresco, Iowa. As a young boy, he experienced the Great Depression firsthand. Seeing the haunting sadness of the poverty-stricken farmers and their families during this time period was one of the first events in his life that encouraged him to be in the field of agriculture. People hundreds, yes, I'm sure thousands, asking for a nickel to buy bread, Borlaug recalls. That's what I think made me want to go into international agriculture. Borlaug attended the University of Minnesota and became interested in plant pathology after hearing a lecture given by Professor Steakman. He stayed at the university until 1942 after receiving his PhD in plant pathology. During the course of this time, Dr. Steakman became his mentor and would soon ask Norman Borlaug to join his endeavor in Mexico. Norman Borlaug started work in Mexico in 1944 and went on to become the director of the wheat program. Even though the main objectives of the program were to teach new farming techniques to Mexican farmers, he had the inclination to seek agricultural innovations. He decided to focus his research on combating the detrimental fungus, stem rust. He crossbred 6,000 types of wheat in the time frame of 9 years through a process called shuttle breeding. Shuttle breeding is the idea of growing 2 successful planting seasons each year that enables the crop to be suitable to 2 different environmental conditions. When Borlaug started off with this project, he was stationed in a research facility in Chapingo, Mexico. In the winter, to improve the breeding process and to be more productive, Borlaug used the Yaqui Valley. This helped speed up the breeding process and also created a wheat strain resistant to 2 different environments. Borlaug's first batch of wheat kept running into one problem. The nutritious top of the plant that held the grain was too heavy for its stalk to hold it up, thus making the plant unusable. Norman Borlaug had a clever idea to fix this.
We searched for many years to find the particular parents with genes that would telescope or reduce the height of the plant, but would it affect the number of grains per head that were set, or the size of the head, or the size of the grain?
He finally took a stand against this problem by crossbreeding a Japanese dwarf wheat with this fungus-resistant wheat strain from northern Mexico to make a semi-dwarf-sized wheat. This allowed the plant to hold more grain without tipping over, enabling the production of wheat to increase remarkably. Even though Mexico became self-sufficient in wheat production in 1956, Borlaug continued his research at the Summit Mexican Experiment Station until 1960. In 1963 to 1964, an all-time harvest record was accomplished with the semi-dwarf wheat importations. In 1967, the United Nations sought after Norman Borlaug and the Rockefeller Foundation in order to free India from starvation. They needed his expertise in tackling adversities against India's poverty like he did in Mexico. Earlier in 1943, the Bengal famine had struck India. The world experienced its worst recorded food disaster where 4 million people died of hunger. It took years to recover from these losses, and in 1966 and 1967, 2 massive droughts threatened to cause famine throughout India once again.
Nearly 500 million human beings, 1/7 of the human race, today face the threat of the worst famine this century. 5 million Indians may die of hunger this year, and by the end of the year, there'll be another 12 million mouths to feed.
Borlaug was asked to take his past discoveries to India, suffering major scarcities of food. The same tactics that were used in Mexico were applied to India, and shuttle breeding played a huge part in the agricultural success. They had to change minor things to make the crop suitable to the landscape, so they crossbred the semi-dwarf wheat with a wheat strain native to the area. India surpassed feeding more than 200 million people. Pakistan had the same success with the semi-dwarf wheat. Due to Borlaug's life-changing wheat, Pakistan progressed from cultivating 3.4 million tons of wheat annually to 18 million today. Pakistan achieved self-sufficiency in 1968 and successfully averted hunger from its country. The Quiet Revolution in Mexico becomes a Green Revolution in India and Pakistan. This term originated in the year 1968 when the U.S. Agency for International Development's director, William Gott, named Borlaug's work a Green Revolution. While Borlaug's stand greatly increased the production of wheat in these underdeveloped nations, his work created some unintended consequences. Pollution and erosion near farm areas due to the large amounts of pesticides, fertilizers, and herbicides needed to grow Borlaug's miracle wheat were some of the negative outcomes of his stand. Borlaug was aware of the adverse impact of his wheat, but felt that the benefits for starving people far outweighed the potentially harmful impact on the land. He replied to his critics by stating that if people lived just 1 month amid the misery of the developing world, as I have for 50 years, they would be crying out for tractors and fertilizer and irrigation canals. Although Borlaug's wheat led to agricultural practices that will need improvement to be ecologically sustainable in the long term, a new generation of scientists can continue and expand upon Borlaug's work to help eliminate global hunger. After helping India and Pakistan with their agricultural dilemma, Borlaug got lured out of retirement in 1984 by a Japanese philanthropist, Ryoichi Sasakawa, to work alongside him and former U.S. President Jimmy Carter to improve agricultural production in Africa. Together, they created the Sasakawa Global 2000 production, which greatly boosted corn and wheat in 15 sub-Saharan African countries.
Is that the hungry season, which was suffered by almost everybody in Nigeria before the time of the cereal grains, no longer existed. People could actually have food all year around.
Borlaug pushed for the Green Revolution until he died in 2009. Borlaug earned many awards as a result of his life-changing work and has become 1 in 7 people to win the Nobel Peace Prize, Presidential Medal of Freedom, and the Congressional Gold Medal. Borlaug's wheat varieties have enhanced disease resistance, are better adapted to a wide range of growing conditions, and have the capability to produce high yields. Even with the progress from all of Borlaug's hard work, people are still dying from hunger all around the world. Norman Borlaug's stand not only saved many people from dying of hunger, but also created new scientific breeding techniques and helped to shift the global mindset around world hunger. Feeding the hungry has changed from being a local responsibility of charities to becoming the responsibility of a global scientific community.
Do the best possible job you can do. Don't be satisfied with mediocrity. Stretch yourself. Reach for the stars. You'll be surprised at the opportunities